So, hello everyone for another session of writing. This is the third part of our writing and designing for games session. It's a little bit special because usually as a writer you have non-fiction books, you have fiction books, and last time we discussed especially the difference between writing a game and writing a novel or writing a non-fiction book. And the main difference we found is that basically games are you have multiple stories. So writing a rule book or writing a game, developing a game is creating a tool for the players, for the reader to create their own story. So it's a type of a story generator we're actually building. And it's not much different to actually writing a novel, except that you have to think about, of course, on the one side, to really lead different readers to different paths. And on the other side, more the economical side, to not make it too complicated. And that is, of course, a challenge, make it easy, to make it learnable and not too complicated, and to not get into monotonous following some rules or so, but to really work in the usual parts of the story we know from, for example, the hero's journey. That's also something we looked at. I'll show it again. So that's the, made it a little bit bigger. That's the hero's journey. It's relation to Star Wars because that's one very good example for using it. So really the idea is to catch the reader from where he or she currently is and describe the ordinary world of the hero and have a call to adventure, some new information, some change in the world, and refusal of the call, like hesitancy, anxiety, and then some mentor, for example, Obi-Wan Kenobi in terms of Star Wars, crossing the threshold, really going on the adventure, tests allies and enemies, really interacting with the world, and approach of the inmost cave, really confronting your inner demons. Ordeal, another change, reward, like really, okay, you master the first issue, but then there's a road back, there's the villain also is resurrected, your resurrection, and a final big change, and then really mastering that and returning with the elixirs, or really solving the issue. The challenge is, of course, we don't have a linear approach. I mean, with a linear story, you have it all under control where the reader goes, because it's a linear page to page to page to page. Maybe some of you know those game books where you can decide whether to go left or to go right, or say this or say that, or make this decision or make that decision, and then go to a certain page number and continue to read there. So that is a first step into that direction, to have no longer a linear experience, but one with going tree-like into different directions. And of course, this is sounds extremely complex and extremely difficult to achieve, to have so many different directions to go with your story, because you have to write every single type. So you have to write hundreds of different stories. So there are, of course, a number of different tricks to go. And the one trick is simply to have that breadth of possibilities for the reader or for the player to go left, right, forward, back, option A, B, and C. But then after the scene plays out, all those go back really, and the linear story continues. So you have always those going out in wide into the breadth, and then returning the story into a linear format. And this is, of course, something you see in games a lot. because also games, sure, there are story generators, but they are also limited. So what you do in games is, for example, you have additional abilities, or you have you can gather cards, or you gather gold, or you get experience points. Or so you have a second, aside from the story, you have a second non-linear way for the characters to develop. So this way you have like the best of both worlds. You have a story that sure goes into different directions, but then returns into the linear story. And you have a separate one, the character, the world, and with the world you can go back and have some complexity there. So what is the challenge? So the creating games means we are creating a story generator. Story generator, complex, many different branches to go out left, right. So we have to reduce those branches, and we have to still provide the player or the reader with a feeling of control. So that the player sees, okay, sure, the player sees, yeah, my decision ultimately didn't change anything directly in the story, but I don't know, got experience points, or got those points or these points. So you have an additional part of a set of rules where you can have that additional complexity and the feeling for the player that he or she is in control. So that is one thing. Okay, so that was just the summary for last time. What do we do today? So today we are looking actually at at several game documents. That's from different games and from one rule book that I'm currently writing. So I think we'll start with looking at some rule books in the industry. For example, I'll just open it. That is, for example, For example, Android, Netrunner. I mean, I'm just going through a list, and we look at different examples and show, okay, what did they do well and what didn't do they well, and then we think about, okay, how could we build our own rule book? And again, the rule book is a sort of story generator, and that's always what we should keep in mind. Okay, so let's look at this one. So Netrunner, that is a card game. It's basically the basic story is it's a cyberpunk story. So it's in the future where the mega corporations took over the world. So there are no more governments. They're all private armies, and you have a lot of technology going around, but you have on the one side, of course, those mega corporations, and on the other side, agents or hackers that try to hack or infiltrate their system. So, and of course, we could now think about, okay, does this cover already show us that this is what it's about? I would say hardly. I mean, sure, what it delivers is the theme. Okay, it's something with technology, upgrades. It's probably something in the future. We have a futuristic skyscrapers in the background. So we have something like, okay, there's maybe some individuals with special abilities, and in the background, the mega city, or however it is called. And that's basically what's delivered by the cover. So that's of course already one thing. Just like with any book cover, it shouldn't be cryptic, where we don't know what it's about. Like, I mean, you could do it if you're an author with many with a famous name or something like that. But usually you want the cover to be clear what is about. So it sets the theme. Okay, futuristic, probably not in the present, and someone with special abilities. So you have some sort of heroes also. So that is it. But where I see it's a miss if I look at the actual game mechanics later. It's not like this tug of war, like where you try to hack into a system or something like that. I mean, it is a little bit implied with the symbols here that something is doing some computery stuff, but that's not yet the point. I mean, that's often a question coming up from the side of the author. Myself, I try to have some sort of cover as early as possible, simply for myself to have something in my mind. And usually I adapt that cover later to fit better the theme, but it is really something where you should put in a number of hours to simply think, okay, what is the theme? And then go back maybe into writing and think about, okay, does the cover art still fit my theme, what I'm writing, the story that I'm writing, or should I go back to design and then go maybe back and forth and see how they fit together? Of course, you could develop a game and do the box art at the very end, but then maybe while designing, or maybe you or the designer, while designing the box art or the book art, you will discover something about the theme of your book, of your story, that wasn't clear while typing in words, abstract mechanics maybe, or writing a story. So having some sort of concept art really helps. Okay, now for the book itself. So what I find good here is it immediately starts here in the it immediately starts with some action, basically. So you're drawn immediately into the story, like you could imagine a movie where the first 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes is an action scene, and this is basically here he describes. So you don't really know yet what it's really about, but okay, you get so the basic core struggle here. What's next is world building. So that is basically here. I think one moment. Okay, all right. I need that picture again with the hero's journey. I have that. Okay. I have it in a moment. So this world building is basically providing the reader with an idea. Okay, that's the ordinary world. That is basically the setting. What is the relationship between me and the world? And usually the best way is, of course, to start in the present or in the near future and tell what is different, or what has happened since then. And to read, because if it's an extremely abstract world, then you have to first tell a long story, and that might take too long, or it might take the reader out of the story. So the best way is to really have a relationship, or building a relationship between what the reader knows and where you want to bring the reader. And one way, of course, is to have some sort of character in the game or in the book that is also someone who doesn't know much. Maybe, of course, some he or she lived some time in that world, but they don't know much about the outer world. So, of course, in Star Wars, that's Luke Skywalker. And we accompany Luke Skywalker in the beginning while he's doing his job, and then slowly learning about what is about the actual mission, about the actual story, background story. And let's see how it is done in Netrunner. So we won't read through everything. I can post the link in the chat if you want to read it. That is a freely available rulebook. That is, I mean, you can simply find it in Google. I mean, there's of course you can't print it and sell it, but it's available. I mean, on Google. Just search for it. So basically, what's here happening here? Really, they talk about the situation in the solar system, that Mars is being terraformed, that there is a space elevator on Earth, that and then there are different cities on Earth, and that there's a lot of with computers, and that there are hackers that check in and plug themselves directly into the internet, and there are mega corporations that basically replaced the governments. So it continues here. So, and that is basically here an introduction. Okay, until they are the runners. So what they did was introducing basically the two sides, mega corporations, also then the world, and of course the runners. You have so basically the three characters, because the world itself is also a character, even if it's not like played in the game like with cards, etc. But it's good to know that there's also a world around in the game that is usually represented by certain events, like economic events or so, that influence the game, but there's no direct player there. Okay. Of course, at this point, it is just a description. Well, a general description. It is not a introduction like with Star Wars, that you start with someone who's and you accompany them, and what's actually my role as a player, who am I, where I'm coming from, what is my daily work. So that is missing. So it's a lot of basically backstory that you have to work through to understand what is going on. So that is a little bit of a barrier. In my own game, but that's of course in construction. That is currently called. Oh, okay. Wait, I'll show it one moment. So now, currently called Impact Beyond. I try a little bit different approach. Of course, there's some structure, like okay, what's even in the box, but really here, what is here my approach? Okay, I also start here with the setup directly with the game. So I say, okay, someone is the narrator of the story, because that is also, of course, a character you have to think about, like you have a character in a book, where you say, okay, is it a second, third person, first person, etc. So who is actually narrating what is going on, or who is explaining the rules? So I just said, okay, one of the players on the table, they will take over the role basically of the storyteller. And that storyteller basically fills the blanks when there are open questions that are not answered by the rulebook. So it's similar to what is done in pen and paper games, where you have someone who is experienced, who basically takes the book, the game book, and interprets the game book, and maybe adapts what is written there to fit the players that are sitting around the table. And if you imagine, compared to a linear book where you basically give out the book to totally strangers, having such a person, such a game master, or I called the person here Herald, the person who's telling the player characters about how the world works. Having such a person helps you a lot as a writer to really adapt to the needs of the individual players. So that basically bridges the gap between you and the unknown reader or unknown player. In terms of books or movies, it would be maybe comparable with sitting together with a friend and discussing the book and discussing the characters and what they're about. So that is basically the role of the herald here. Okay, then I basically do the same thing as with as in Android Netrunner. I just explain what is going on in the world. It is difficult to directly start with saying, okay, you are this and that, and ignoring the world. So you really have to bridge the gap between the present and when this plays. Of course, if you write like a historical thing, then you can just explain also, I mean, what is different and how people lived back then. Of course, much easier and the player get much quicker into the game if your game or book is in the present. I mean, it's same with movies and saving some money and effort on props. Okay, and then basically what I do is already have the herald, have the first player, have the experienced player explain the individual cards, and then always get interrupted here with explaining and continuing the story. That's here marked with that black bar. So this is just information for the herald, basically for the player to learn the rules. But that here is actually the continuing of the story. So what I'm basically doing here is going here, explaining, okay, what's going on, what's the ordinary world, and then with the tutorial, I bring the players that are sitting around a table to join the adventure, and then think about, okay, what part of my rule books that usually are like dry mathematics or game mechanics, how can I combine that with the hero's journey? So I have to answer, okay, what is the call to adventure? What is the refusal of the call? Meeting with the mentor, crossing the threshold, etc., and integrate that into my game world. And that is a very interesting thing to do, especially because it's the hero is no longer directly under your control. I mean, in a book, you can basically control the hero, while here the hero or heroes, the players playing the game, are sitting around the table and you don't have them under control at all. You can direct them a little bit, but then you always have to give them freedom for them to really enjoy it. Because that's why they're playing a game. They don't want to just listen to a story. They want to interact with the story. They want to feel in the driver's seat. They want to be the ones driving the story. Okay. So this is basically here the story, and I continue explaining the story here always with something going on in the world. So that is basically the linear story, and everything in between those boxes are the other points where the players interact with each other, where they are active. And that is what I discussed in the beginning, where you say, okay, I have a linear story that I provide, like how the world came to be, how it is now, and then I provide options for the player, and then I return into a linear story. And for example, in my game, what it is about, future. There was an asteroid impact, and there's chaos on the world, and 8 factions emerged as the new superpowers, and they are now, of course, in competition taking over the world. And you're someone working for those 8 organizations, and that's already a start where the players can decide, okay, for which organization do I work for? And that is one way to express it. Okay, going back to the rulebook from Netrunner. So, Netrunner here goes directly into the game mechanics, and here has a basic overview, so that is basically a bird's eye view. Okay, what is the game actually about? How does it play? How does it feel? And game mechanics always sounds so abstract, but you have to think of it as like the story mechanics. Like, for example, that there's a suspense, that there's a romance or a climactic event, there's a fight, or there's a crisis or so. And these emotional elements, I mean, what a game designer has to do is to use those emotional elements that you would usually use in a story and translate them into game mechanics. That is basically a challenge in terms of psychology, because there's a lot of interaction between those players, and it is a challenge in terms of having this translation at all, and preventing like really negative experiences, of course, with your games. So you really have to think about special cases. Will someone throw over the desk and this game is no fun. You're winning and I'm losing. This doesn't make fun. I'm not feeling like I'm on the hero's journey. So it is a lot more complex, and I think that is personally what I like, and the challenge of really creating such a story creator, which is a game. What is then what at least this manual then continues with is the object. So what is the goal of the game? That is usually usually American games usually will want to focus. Okay, how can I win this game? I mean, that's why I'm playing it. Maybe Euro games are a little bit different. They like more describing the game mechanics, but if you want to write for the American market, then this is the way to go. You want an objective of the game, and here this is about gaining points, and you can gain points by playing certain cards, and the other player can steal those cards using special abilities. And to prevent stealing the cards, at least in this game, you can put down other cards, and you put them face down so the other player doesn't know which cards it is, and there's a tug of war going back and forth, and the one side prepares to overrun your defenses, like computer defenses, and the other side tries to defend it. And that is the core of this game. Okay. Then it just, what this manual then does after this first introduction into the world, then it basically describes the physicality of the cards and the things that are basically in the box. So, I mean, that is basically the representation of the world. And with those different cards and different tokens, the game tries to visually simulate a certain game state. So instead of having like many pages of storyline, games try to show this complexity by moving cards around and implying a certain story. And with these tokens and with these cards, the players can imagine a certain story where they are the heroes. Okay. And then it goes into the general mechanics. Where do I place the individual parts? What are the different words that this book will use. So what is an inactive card? What is an active card? So you can imagine that different game mechanics are repeated again and again and again. And you can imagine, like, if you're writing a book and you first have to explain the vocabulary to the reader, or certain concepts that are going on in the story. Of course, here you could argue this is all very abstract, like in a game book. Maybe it would be more interesting, or it would be more challenging, instead of saying, well, an active card's abilities affect the game and can be triggered. Can you maybe have a situation described in a story format where maybe the superior of the character the player plays explains different concepts of the world directly in a story format, instead of just saying, well, this is this, this is that, this is that, because this is very, very abstract and raw. So maybe as a challenge, instead of this very, very abstract format, maybe it would be possible to really put all this into a story. And that is of course challenging. It's something I'm attempting, but I'm still early with that. It's still an early version. So I also have that, okay, this means that, this means that, this means that, this means that. And this means that, and this means that. So maybe I could instead put all this abstract information really in a story where someone sits down with someone else, or you observe something as a character, and that explains what this is. I mean, that is basically you need both. You eventually in the rulebook you need that abstract information, just like you would add a glossary maybe in a non-fiction book to really explain certain special terms that where the explanation would interrupt the usual text flow. So you put it in the end of the book instead. So again, this opens another dimension really, and that really makes it challenging to write a good rule book, to both have it interesting, have it complete, have it correct, but also keeping the reader that is currently like spending 1 or 2 of their hours just to understand what your game is about, maybe to put that reader already on an hero's journey. Because imagine you would read a novel, and the first thing in the novel is like a description of the economic system, how that works, a description of different social classes, maybe a description of or a biography, and then comes the current state of the world, etc. I mean, where you would have to first read 500 pages to even get to the first scene with the character. That is not something people like. And that is, and integrating that, what we know works very well with novels, to really get the player directly into the action, and for the reader, and for the reader to learn step by step more about the world. That is a challenge, and that's what I think makes it interesting, and that's what I think makes current or many of the current rule books a bit difficult to explain, difficult to read, because it's all like chess rules, or this and this and this and that. Of course, those pictures are nice, etc., and those explanations are nice, and it's good for looking things up, etc. But it's not the rule book here doesn't take the player characters really like a wise guy here with the meeting with the mentor, really on taking their hand and guiding them slowly through the complexity of the game. Basically, you first have to read a lot and understand a lot before you really get into starting the actual scene, like in a movie. So again, it would be like you have to first read a book before you can start, before you can lean back and watch the movie. That's not something you like, and that's not something the players like, and especially the more and more I mean, maybe back 50 years ago or so, it was okay if the rules were half bacon, or if first you had to read a lot about the background and set up the whole thing for half a day and then play a few hours. But today people want to sit down, maybe learn 10, 20 minutes the rules and then start. Just like with a novel, and that's why novels are so popular. You sit down, you open the book, you read the first page, and you're directly into the story. I mean, that's how it should be. If you can achieve that, of course, maybe the reader doesn't know everything about the world on the first few pages and is a little bit confused, but you have to, in the first few pages of the book, you have to engage the reader. That's interesting, that's an interesting situation, let's to go another page, another page, another page. So that is something you want, of course, to achieve with novels. But what I see, it's not much done with rule books. Let's look at yeah. I mean, what that one does good. Let's show one more time the contents. Wait, scroll up. Where was the contents? Oh no, it doesn't have contents. Right. What this rulebook does well is actually wait. I think it's not in this book. I have a copy here on. Yeah, it's a little bit different. So what's actually in the actual printed one? On the first page, it says stop. I mean, they have a box here, and they say stop. The rulebook is divided into two parts. The first part is basically the tutorial. Please, players, play first the tutorial. Then you understand 80% of the rules. And then the second half of the rulebook, there are the more complex ones that add a certain level of variety. And but they are more complex to describe. But you can already start the game with the basic rules. And that is actually what novels are about. You can start reading and enjoying a story already having limited amount of knowledge about the world. Just like with a movie, you can enjoy it from the first moment on. You don't have to know the entire world. Of course, with a movie, you have the advantage of the visual element, where you can have a picture and see with one look at the screen what it is about. But I mean, this is only limited with books, except for the book cover. But for games, of course, you have a lot of those items, like I showed previously, or show with mine. You have those different cards, and they can set the mood what this game is about. So you have to use these things to really set the mood, to really engage the reader into wanting to read more about your story, wanting to read more about your story generator, and already thinking about how they could play the game, and maybe already think about stories or what they could, or what player they want to play in that game, instead of having really that 1 hour block of learning rules and then having fun. So try, just like with a novel, try to engage the player as early as possible. Maybe with a tutorial, maybe with saying, okay, after the tutorial is done, then the real game begins. So restart the game. So that is okay. It's not ideal, but it is okay. And have it like a novel and engage the player early, instead of having this 1 hour of rules. Okay, let's look at a few other examples and see how they do it. I have a number of examples prepared. let's look at, this is a totally different game. Well, a moment, I will share it. So that is called Blood Bowl Team Manager. Again, totally different one. I'll share it a moment. So again, we start, I'll also copy it into the chat. One moment. Where is it here? Okay, so we start again with the cover, and here we have a lot of information here already. Okay, it is background, it is an arena, so it is a limited or also limited area where the whole game is. So it's not like an open world where you go through the forest or something like that. Then of course we have this one. So this immediately anyone who knows that genre, fantasy genre, will see, okay, this is probably a fantasy genre that's like an orc or an ogre, and it is invisible in the background, but that is fantasy, but it seems like a typical fantasy setting, middle ages or so. And on the left side we have human, and with like insignia, so maybe they're the good guys, so it's the good guys versus the bad guys. And we have, of course, the central part of the game, that is the ball, and they're basically fighting over the ball. So that describes the entire game. Sure, it doesn't matter if it's a card game or a dice game or so, but the core theme, the struggle between two players, maybe there are more players, but those are two players, though that is there. What I miss here, and that is basically here in the text, is a team manager. So where here is really a team, where's the managing part? I don't see that at all. So it's just focused on the action part. Okay, so let's see how it works. So the good start, it directly puts you, it doesn't start with like some abstract rules. The story begins immediately. So it starts here with welcome big leagues, welcome sports fans and all our loyal viewers on Cablevision. Cablevision. So what you have here is like you're watching TV. So and this is well introduced. So you're directly put into the situation. So you can already imagine, okay, you're sitting there and you're watching a sport event based on the thing, okay, and you're in the world. Of course, there's no explanation yet of the game mechanics. So this is all here like written like a here also you see here a microphone, another microphone. So it's a typical two-person commentators that comment on the game. As with the other rulebook, and I think that is a standard. Here they have an overview. They have an object of the game. What is the goal? So you want to be manager of the year, and briefly this brief description what this game is about. And here that is basically again about the name definition. They put it in. That's a little bit out of order. That could be done better. Then they have a component list of what's everything in the box. That is also, that is hard to do in a story, like what's in a box. And again, description of the individual parts. And then again, it's the same what I criticized with the other game. So it's dry game setup. So that's all technical stuff to do. Picture, technical stuff, description. Here again, it's more story again. So what are the different factions? in the game, so that is a plus. But then again, we're back into the different game mechanics, winning the game, etc., etc. So that is then less interesting. That is again not a real story, and it kind of falls flat after the interesting intro with the TV show. Of course, again, also in terms of space, how much people have to read about your book or your game, it is easier to do it a little bit more compressed form with those really abstract rules, but players basically can't play your game before they read through everything. So that is I think a drawback. There are other games like I think it's called Dune. It's about the current movie board game. Wait, do I have it here? Of course, with games that are already based on a book. I mean, that's also an interesting point. If you're already a published author and you think you have developed an interesting world, maybe you can reuse that and have a little game in your world, maybe as a promotion piece for your book, or vice versa, with a background story, etc. And of course, if you have a license for an existing movie or existing book series, it's even easier because your fans might already know all the background stuff, and all you have to explain are now the mechanics. But even when explaining the mechanics, you can always draw on that background knowledge. So again, similar as you would write a second part of your series. So you have to think about, okay, should I expect people to have bought the first one, or should I start again the hero's journey, the journey of the reader, really at what is the ordinary world? Should I restart it? And that is a problem also of some movie sequels where people haven't seen the first or second part. So how do you still catch those who haven't seen the backstory, and how can you make them still enjoy it without them having seen all the parts? And same with books, and this goes, of course, through your entire also marketing, because obviously, if your book can be read standalone, then you might be able to reach more. And if it can't, then maybe give out the first book for free to advertise the second book. So there are different options then. Okay, but we are going away a little bit from games. So let's look at the Dune board game. One moment. So in the Dune board game, I think there are two versions. Wait. I think it's Dune Imperium. Yeah, and they do have a tutorial. One moment. They do have a tutorial. Wait. Zoom a little bit. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, obviously it looks pretty, and it has, they put a lot of money into it, and they have the license for the from the movie, etc. The problem with this one is that they do have a tutorial. I mean, that's great for new people to get in, but it uses different mechanics than the actual game. Of course, that is then half as good. So you don't really need that tutorial. Just play the actual game twice. And this, I mean, it is of course a challenge how you do it in games, just like you do it in a book. Because actually, what you want to do in a book is for the reader to already have to already know all the background, and then you really want to have that story in that world and really develop the characters, etc. But of course, you have to do a compromise in that regard. So you have to integrate that the reader doesn't know about the world into your story, and that is why there are so many stories with like fish out of water or origin stories, or stories where the character doesn't know much about the world, and that is exactly the part of the hero's journey. So the reason why even something like the hero's journey exists, at least partly, is because that is, you want to put the reader into that hero's position, and the reader doesn't know yet about the world. So many stories are about people who are just exploring and then growing up, learning about the world, simply because the reader doesn't know your world yet. And the exception is, of course, again, stories in the present, where the reader already knows the world, and where you can write about something maybe more sophisticated than following just a hero's journey. But of course, with games, you have to explain the world, have to explain the game mechanics. So you also have, while explaining the game mechanics, also bring the players into some sort of hero's journey. And a simplified version is to have a tutorial and then the real game. I mean, that is the most simplified. Second level would be okay to have the tutorial, have the actual game be an add-on to the tutorial. So the tutorial doesn't have separate rules, but it's simply limited rules of the actual game. And even better would be if everything can be learned step by step. Maybe you can add rules independently, modularly, and you can learn one rule after the other, but you can still enjoy the game while playing. And that is the challenge also with game design, just as it is with writing a novel. So it is very similar, because really you have to think about what role does your reader have in that regard. Okay, maybe so that was just Dune. I haven't played that yet. I just read about it, and they say basically the tutorial doesn't fit the actual game. Otherwise, what I've read, it's a well-made game. But of course, what we're talking about today is the rulebook and writing a better rulebook. And part of it is not just I want to describe a perfect game or something like that. Just like you don't want to write about a perfect world or something like that. You want to take the reader or the player by the hand and guide them through your ideas, through your world. And you have to meet them where they currently are, and then guide them slowly through your world. And that is basically the origin, or why it makes sense to have some sort of hero's journey. Okay, continuing, we'll look at two other rule books, and then I will summarize. The next one would be, this one is nice. So the next one is Fantastic Factories. So that is basically about, full screen. So this is the first page. So it already describes like the number of players, minutes, age. This is usually on the box. And here's the central theme already there. Okay, there's a factory. There are different stages here. And this is a race against other players to build the most efficient set of factories in the fewest number of rounds. Carefully manage your blueprints, train your workers, and manufacture as many goods as possible in order to achieve industrial dominance. So what this game does in terms of setting is it's in the present. So you have a huge advantage, of course. Everyone knows factories. So you just put the player into a factory manager. So all you now have to do is to explain how to manage a factory. And that is, of course, easier in terms of getting into the game, just like you would write a novel about present situation. Again, the usual part. Okay, there's what is everything here in the box. Then the setup, how you set up the different thing. Then here some terminology, the usual stuff. You see a repetition in every rulebook. And basically, to write a rulebook, the first thing you have to do is read as many rulebooks as you can. Many of them are online, and that is the way to go. Then pictures, how it all should look like. Objective, here it comes a little bit later, probably because this is a Euro game and not for the US market focused. For the US market, it would be further up. Then the different phases, examples, etc., etc. And game end, some additional rules, some special rules, appendix, and that's it. So you see there's no story here except for the very first here. Basically, that is everything here in the story. And if you look at the hero's journey, we already know what the ordinary world is. And basically that is the call to adventure to, well, create optimal factories, and everything else is then in the game mechanics. So there's no more, basically it then continues with the tests, allies, and enemies, and then at the end you count the points. So you see, it's a different type of game that is much less focused on storytelling and more on the game mechanics, so that within the game mechanics, the players themselves maybe think about, okay, how what type of story do we play? One more example. Maybe this one. Moment. Okay. So this one is called Human. So again, this is the first page here. Human Punishment. Well, this is a stock photo, and this basically is, well, a little bit scary, maybe an android or robot, and in a new city. So it's a cyberpunk environment. Human Punishment, Social Deduction 2.0. So it tells us basically the core game mechanic on the cover, and well, that is the rule book. So let's look into it. It immediately starts with numbers. Okay. So this is probably not a book where you just read from beginning to end. So you could question this decision why to put numbers here, because I don't know anything at this point what this is about, or what these symbols are, or whatever. No more numbers. Okay, maybe we'll just accept it that we can just skip those things. So we'll continue. Game contents, that's just the user one. Now we start with the story. So if I would be the editor, maybe I would think about, okay, put it further up. On the other hand, if these are tables you have to reference very often during the game, maybe it might make sense to put them on the first few pages, because then you can more quickly find it. So this is also a user experience thing that is usually totally absent from writing books. That's also interesting, because you seldom think about, okay, this is at the beginning and then at the end or so, but because it's very linear and the people don't have to reference back to it, you don't need that. At least so maybe the glossary also at the end. Okay, so here's the story. Blah, blah, blah. There's a virus, and there are basically machines and humans, and just like, for example, Battlestar Galactica, you have to find out who's the machine and who's the human. And so basically that is the story. But then again, it is all about game mechanics, putting the ID cards there, shuffling here, putting it there, setting up the game. Unraveled, you start with that HP win condition again, and then when one is eliminated and blah blah blah. And there's all abstract rules, all directed at the player. So it's all, you're not yet in the game at this point. You have to first learn the rules and then get into it. That is something you should question because it gets a player out of the experience. That is all game mechanics. Maybe here's some backstory. That is again about weapons, program cards. It's all game mechanics. Here are again more rules. And now it starts a little bit with tips and strategies, hints. Question is here, this is all written basically breaking the fourth wall, directed at the player and not at a character inside the thing. So the real immersion doesn't start here with the rule book, but only after everyone has understood the rules, only then starts the immersion. And again, rules, alternative rules, first session. Again, this is all directed at the player and not at characters, and then it's over here, right? Okay, this is an expansion. This is an expansion. But again, this is all game mechanics. With examples. Game mechanics. Yeah, so it is all directed at the player and not at the character of the player. So that is a challenge. And this maybe makes, I mean, okay, to summarize, what did I say today? So to summarize, my point is novels are great. Novels take the reader by the hand, and they start right where the reader is and introduce them to the world. And I think rule books should be the same. The only difference between normal novels and rule books is that a rule book is a story generator for many different stories. But again, the immersion should be there. What I did is introducing Harold, like a game master that explains the story, so as an intermediary, but I tried to really explain the rules step by step. With Android Netrunner, we saw that they split the rulebook basically in the middle and say, okay, there's a tutorial and there are advanced rules, and the advanced rules are based on the basic rules. So at least there's some progression in there, so you don't have to learn everything and only then have fun, but you can learn it step by step. Similarly with Dune, but with the downfall that the tutorials rules are very different than the actual game. So that also puts a player out of the experience. So my proposal is, okay, first see rule books as story generators. Second, look at I mean, although rule books are usually abstract, still treat the players just like you would treat a reader. and put the reader also, or the player also, on a hero's journey while reading the rulebook. What can you learn for writing novels? Maybe put more focus really on the hero's journey, take the reader more by the hand, and maybe think about, can you, even though it's a linear story, can you maybe still play with the character, maybe in their own mind, keeping some information secret, also building suspense, and think about suspense also as a mechanic, just like you would have a game mechanic. You have a mechanic in the in your novel. Also, game rules. Your novel also has rules, a backstory, how the world works, and that's meeting the player's the reader's expectations, just like game rules meet the player's expectations. So that is something. Basically, with the exercise of creating a game, you learn more about writing novels. Vice versa, if you're building a rule book, you should think about writing a novel and structure your rule book accordingly. Really write as a novel, but it happens to be a rule book. Vice versa, write a game book, write your description of the world, but think about that the reader is fresh to the world and you have to introduce them one by one. So these are my thoughts today about the connections between rule books and novels. If you have any questions, just put it below in the comments. And looking forward for next week. I haven't yet prepared a topic. If you have any idea for a topic that we could talk about, or present your own ideas, present your own novels, just post them below in the comments. Otherwise, my goal is to move this slowly again, depending on the pandemic, to a localized coffee shop here in Germany, but also stream it online. We'll see. Just let me know what you thought, if you found some interesting ideas, and we'll see us next week. Bye.